is my tool. This is what I have to offer the world. I can tell decision makers something about efficiency, and as a behavioral economist, I can tell them something about these weird things that sort of tweak the efficiency outcomes of our models. If you're a decision maker, you're not obliged to care about economic efficiency. You can care about lots of other things, right? You can care about whether or not people are going to vote you back into office, right? So if you're just about to face re-election, you probably, for your own selfish purposes, should care whether or not people suffer from loss aversion, because that's what they're going to care about between now and the election, right? So and maybe you actually care about people, and you say, look, these people are basically sheep. They don't know the difference between loss aversion and real social value, but they deserve to be taken at face value. They don't like the loss of a lane of the bridge. Fine, I'm going to go with that because I'm nice, Mr. Democratic or Mrs. Democratic. That's fine by me, but I want to be able to say something clear cut. I want to be able to give a policymaker a clear answer. Okay. Now you've seen what economists have done to date in order to be able to come up with one clear answer to what should our models tell us. They've assumed rationality. And once you assume rationality, you get consistent preferences. There are no preference reversals. Willingness to pay is the end of the road, and you just tell people the number. I'm not willing to assume rationality. Turn it off, but don't blame yourself too hard. Mine went off in the middle of my last class. What was I saying? So I don't want to assume rationality. I've got to come up with some other basis to make my analytical tool sort of meaningful and not just stupid. Okay. So here's how I get there. I've done this before, so I'll just blast through it. Imagine a policy of creating an acre of wetland and then destroying it, and then creating it again, destroying it ad infinitum. Right? If we take Jack Kennedge's approach literally, we would eventually destroy every dollar's worth of consumer surplus in society without ever changing the measurable outcomes of the planet of the Earth. Right? So you value each gain according to willingness to pay, and then let people adapt to the gain, which changes their reference point. Then you value each loss according to willingness to accept, which is bigger, and then you let people adapt to the loss. Okay? It's this adaptation that really throws a wrench in the works. That's, for me, that's where I focus in trying to puzzle through how should I deal with loss aversion as a policy analyst and an economist. Okay? So that's kind of like the money pump. This is obviously absurd. So in some sense, if you're going to take Knecht seriously, you actually have to be able to justify that piece of policy analysis that I just did, which is ridiculous. Okay? And it's the adaptation that makes it ridiculous. So what is the point of all this? I can't remember, and I'll remind myself before I move on. So I think there's some stuff I wanted to say before I move on. Yeah, so I want to harp on this adaptation thing. Okay, so yeah, let's take the bridge example and modify it a little bit. So what I said, just in passing, was the bridge just got damaged, right? Now suppose that this project, we're still trying to choose between repairing a bridge and expanding a bridge. Let's say it's two different bridges and everything else is identical. But the decision-making process gets hung up in politics, kind of like you guys know about the Bay Bridge, the new Bay Bridge. It took the old one was deemed seismically unfit in 1989. The new one opened right last September. So about 3/5 of that lag was politics. Okay, so now it's 2 years later, okay, and your drive to your favorite music venue has been 10 minutes longer for 2 years now, okay? So long that you have a new favorite music spot. I come and do the contingent valuation survey. Should I expect the same results? Not at all, right? That's obvious. You just know by intuition. Your reference point will have adapted. You'll be used to it. You may not like it, but you will be used to it. And so then you're likely to say, well, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, frankly. If these people are going to save 10 minutes, these people are going to save 10 minutes. There's the same number of them, there's the same type of people. Toss a coin, it doesn't matter, okay? So I guess, sort of like the dumb way to think about this is, how long does a bridge typically last? 30, 50 years. The Bay Bridge was built in 1939. And your loss aversion goes away in certainly no more than 2 years' time, probably a lot less, right? So you might say, okay, but for the 6 months it takes for your reference point to adapt, I want to take your loss aversion into consideration. But honestly, we're talking about pouring several tens of billions of dollars worth of concrete here. I'll just tell you my position. I don't care about your loss aversion, okay? You're going to get used to it. Please get over it, right? It's like the little kid. You've got 2 toys. You've watched the kid play with both toys endlessly with complete fascination separately. And they happen to have one of them in their hand right now, and you would like them to play with the other one. You just try it, right? I'm not interested. Personally, I'm just, but you might take a completely different position, which is fine by me, and I'm perfectly happy to entertain that there are different answers to this question. To me, it's not how I want to make public policy decisions. Okay, I think that's all I want to say about that. Okay, so what is the point? And this paper, I think, is on DSpace as an optional reading, and you should go take a look at it and see. Is he making a cogent point that is more defensible than mine? I'm perfectly happy to leave you to form your own opinions about that. Okay, what is the point of all this? Under the assumption of rationality, right, we get one demand curve, and we can use observed demand curves, stuff we can go out and actually see in the real world, which could be either willingness to pay or willingness to accept. It won't matter, because to a first-order approximation, they'll be the same thing, and we can use those as a valid tool for measuring consumer welfare. Fine. I showed you that the endowment effect, that reference dependence and loss aversion violate the assumption of rationality. That means it is because of that we wind up with 2 different demand curves, and then we don't know which one represents consumer's true value, which means we no longer have a valid tool for measuring consumer welfare. This is like the most fundamental point I want you to grasp. It's the rationality, I think this is my next bullet point, it's the rationality that forms the glue, is the way I put it, a very sort of casual analogy, or metaphor. It's the glue that holds together the positive value of our models, the ability to predict things and know what is likely to happen and do positive analysis together with the normative dimension. Okay? And behavioral economists like to just let go of that glue. Right? So if we knew people's reference points, and this is another crucial issue, if we knew for certain whether your reference point was, relative to my reference point, this policy represents giving up wetlands, if we knew for sure what your reference point is, we could still use the reference-dependent model to make valid predictions. But we would have a hard time with the valuation. Sorry, I missed something a second ago. Nobody caught me on this. Okay, sorry. Just backing up a little bit. There's my value function. Expand the bridge is this, right, which gets you this much benefit. Fix the bridge is not a loss. Fix the bridge is restoring a loss, right? So bridge breaks is this. These are supposed to be equal, and it takes you down to here, right? So this is a lot more utility harm than utility gain. Fix the bridge is getting you from here to here. Okay? Fix the bridge. We call that like a foregone loss or restoring a loss, etc. The point is that anywhere in this half of the graph, you're in what we refer to as the domain of losses. Okay? And what matters from the standpoint of the reference dependence model is not whether we're taking something away from you or giving you something. What matters is whether we're moving you around within the domain of losses or within the domain of gains. Okay? So giving you back something that you recently lost before your reference point adapts is going to have similarly inflated value. Okay? I shouldn't have a conversation with someone earlier about stick.com, which takes advantage of this, but I'm going to leave that aside for a moment. I might come back to it. Okay, so take-home message. Behavioral economics provides a model that makes better predictions. Right? We're completely driven by the goal of making better positive predictions, and in the process, we do so at the cost of not being able to use the model for normative purposes, and that's the glue statement that I made. So this, I have to tell you, this heat is really undermining my cognitive functioning. So I'm going to drink hot coffee. That'll fix it. Okay, so let's take this a step further. So we talked about benefit cost analysis, just putting dollar values on things. Now we're going to talk about sort of another huge topic that you learned about a lot in 100A, and I sort of touched on this, I think, in the first day of the semester, which has to do with what conclusions should we draw about whether or not to regulate markets, right? Market intervention. So I'm just going to reiterate for you a little thing called the first fundamental welfare theorem. Does anybody remember that? If I said, let's all chant it together? Would you know, right? So the first fundamental welfare theorem says that any market equilibrium, in the assumptions of a perfectly rational, perfectly competitive market, any market equilibrium is Pareto efficient, which is to say you can't make it better, okay? Which is to say markets are best. And what that looks like graphically is very straightforward. Okay, so this is supply and demand under the standard model of perfect competition and rational preferences. Okay. So the willingness to pay of buyers, the demand and the willingness to accept of sellers allows us to predict market equilibrium, right? It'll be right at the point at which the marginal willingness to pay of the marginal consumer is equal to the marginal willingness to accept of the marginal producer, because beyond that, the next consumer is not willing to pay enough to be willing to pull the next producer into the market. What does that do for us? Well, we can add up consumer surplus, which is this, with producer surplus, and if we deviate from that equilibrium in any direction, right? If we go to sort of like if this is Q star, the optimal, if we go to Q sort of high, which is above that, or some Q low, which is below that, here we're going to get deadweight loss because, and this is all just review, obviously, what we're doing is we are trading units, we're trading mugs, we're producing and consuming mugs that are not worth it to society. The value that I get out of them as a consumer is less than the cost to society of producing them, which is the height of supply curve, and here this is deadweight loss because there were a bunch of mugs we should have produced and consumed, which we didn't. That graph right there says, in so many words, sort of this is the famous conclusion, or possibly infamous, depending upon how you see things, that the famous conclusion of this model is that perfectly competitive markets are socially optimal. Okay? So unless you can convince me that there's some kind of market failure, some kind of failure of perfect competition, then you should stay out of the market, right? You should let the market do what it knows how to do best, which is to allocate things according to prices. This is called the first fundamental welfare theorem. Okay? It is, for many people, particularly in this society, it is the single most important thing that microeconomics has to teach us, right? Stay out of my market. The crucial thing here is this. The crucial thing is to think about, what's being said here is that the market is a more successful, efficient way of allocating resources than any other mechanism, right? So take the market and stick in a tax or a subsidy or a quota or a price ceiling or a price floor or some other kind of regulation, you have a different kind of allocation mechanism than just a completely unfettered, unregulated market. Throw in, some Soviet commissar who's determining who should get strawberry and who should get vanilla, which is not an exaggeration of what it was like in those planned economies. Not an exaggeration. And it just makes matters worse, right? So what the claim is that the market does a good job because the price in the market conveys perfect information that no policymaker could possibly hope to get. It conveys information about how much the goods are worth to people and how much they could cost producers to produce, right? So the market is a way of transmitting information. And because the market transmits information about values so successfully from one side of the market to the other, we get this perfect allocation, this X marks the spot optimal allocation. So I would like to go on record as saying that I think that is incredibly true and incredibly good. That's a fantastic thing. It's necessary for you guys to understand why that is that is the thing that is so fabulous about markets. It's not that you can go and get rich in them. It's that they actually do something phenomenal that no centralized policymaker could ever possibly do, right? Which is to harness the flow of information magically and, as Adam Smith pointed out, invisibly, right? The invisible hand of the market is actually the invisible information flow. Here's the basic problem. The information needs to be right. Right? The information is the willingness to pay of consumers and the willingness to accept of suppliers, producers, and the information needs to be right. Okay? In the case of an externality like pollution, the way in which the information is wrong is that willingness to pay doesn't include the fact that the thing you buy is going to harm somebody else by making them choke and get lung cancer. In the case of behavioral market failure, the information is wrong because your willingness to pay can't actually be relied upon as a correct or consistent measure of what something is actually worth to you as an individual, someone inside the market. That's why it's called an internality. It's an information failure that happens internally to the market as opposed to externally. Does that make sense? I have no idea whether that was a yes or a no. I think, at this stage, the answer to almost any question I could ask you would be 85 degrees Fahrenheit. It's like, you ask an academic, how are you doing? The answer is always the same. I'm busy. How are you doing? I'm busy. Or even, sometimes it gets worse. How are you doing? I'm grading. Leave me alone. Okay, so let's just look. We're going to hammer things into the ground here. You've seen this already. What happens if sellers have reference-dependent preferences? I could do sellers and buyers, and later in the semester I will. Then what would I get, right? I get a supply curve that is higher than in the standard model, because you'd be stating a willingness to accept that is based on adding in loss aversion, right? It's like, to you, the cost of giving up a mug, if you own one, right? This is like the used market for mugs. And your willingness to, the cost to you, the marginal cost of supplying a mug is the value that you got out of using the mug to drink plus your loss aversion cost, okay? And that loss aversion cost pushes up the supply curve relative to what it would be if you didn't have loss aversion. Yeah?
Quick question. How would loss aversion give you intention to sell something you're creating?
Hold that thought for about 2 or 3 slides, and remind me of your name. Lawrence, okay. Hold that thought. That's where we're going. We need to get there faster than I'm going right now. Okay. In terms of predictive power, fine. This is no problem. These curves are still derived from observed choice. If my model is derived from observed choices, then it better do a pretty good job of predicting your observed choices, right? If I ask you 1,000 times, would you prefer a banana to an apple, and then I want to predict what your behavior will be, it's probably going to be that you will choose a banana. But in terms of measuring social surplus, fine. We could have a different supply curve if it was based on people's stated willingness to pay. And this, in some sense, this would be the market outcome here. And then we would say, okay, well, if we take the normative, if we take the Jack-Knetsch approach, then we have CS and PS. Okay? And then the question you got to ask yourself is, if we somehow could sort of like throw Wonder Woman's magical lasso over people's sellers' heads and like get them to forget about loss aversion, and get the market out to here, would we have done a good thing in the world or not? Okay? Because by and large, again, as I say, there's this adaptation issue, and in the long run, you might find that the sellers would thank you for pushing them there. I'm not advocating that particular public policy, but this is the fundamental question. It's a challenge to the first fundamental theorem of welfare. Is it actually the case that the market equilibrium is optimal if we have some reason to think that the prices that people express their willingness to accept and pay are actually sort of in some sense not correct? Bad information. Okay. Here's what I want to tell you just as a matter of fact, that in the great wide world of actual benefit cost analysis, which is done a great deal and matters a lot for policymaking, the fact of the matter is that we've moved on. Jack-Knetsch, in the context of benefit cost analysis, Jack-Knetsch is a voice in the wilderness. We don't use willingness to accept by and large. So I just decided to jump on the winning team. Yeah? What I just said? So in terms of actual benefit cost analysis, if you go to the annual meeting of the Society for Benefit Cost Analysis, every single year, Jack-Knetsch will present a new paper in which he makes the same point, eloquently, and you might very well say convincingly, and there's literally not another person in the hotel who agrees with him. Okay? So as a matter of practice, policy making, benefit cost analysis in the real world of policy making, it's like, no, this is too fluky, it's too crazy, we have lots of reasons to reject willingness to accept, and we like to use contingent valuation surveys that are based on willingness to pay. Yeah. Okay, for better or worse. All right, Lawrence, right? Let's go back to Lawrence's point, which was what? Say it again? Oh, why, if they're expecting to sell the mug, why would they have loss aversion? Okay, so John List, who's from the University of Chicago, asked the very same question. For those of you who don't know, University of Chicago is the global capital of rationality, which is why it's so hilarious that Steve Levitt is thought of as a behavioral economist. It's interesting. So the Department of Economics at the University of Chicago is truly the home of. It's like the what's the name of that crazy school in Harry Potter? It's like the Hogwarts of rationality. But interestingly, Dick Thaler teaches at the Booth School of Management, which is also at the University of Chicago. So they all go to the same seminars. Okay, here's List's hypothesis: market experience will eliminate the endowment effect. Okay, the market will solve its own problem. Okay, so you say you have a consumer rationality problem that's going to undermine the market. I say the market itself is going to fix that. And if so, then the standard model is good enough. Let's say so Knetsch tried to salvage the normative value of the new model. List is saying to heck with that. Let me see if I can count on the market to salvage the entire positive and normative value of the old model. Okay, so here's what he did: 2003, following field experiment. It's a little bit. Definition of a field experiment is a little dodgy, but we won't worry about that. So List did this. He recruited subjects at a sports card and sports memorabilia trading show. To those of you from foreign countries, and many of you from this country, this may seem perplexing, that people would actually go to a large arena to look at sports cards and sports memorabilia, but that is what happens. So he recruited people one by one at a table at the show as they pass by. That's what it looks like. Okay? And there are people who are profoundly obsessed with this stuff, and John List is one of them, by his own admission. I saw him present this work. He randomly assigned them to two groups as they came by. Each one, he sort of rolled a die, and assigned them to one of two groups, and he endowed each one of them with a different good. Good A was a Kansas City Royals ticket stub. There it is. Good B was a Milwaukee Brewers commemorative certificate. I have absolutely no idea what that means, but this was the best I could come up with on Google Images. And he says that apparently their book value is about the same. How does John List know this? Because he writes the book value. That's part of what he does on the side for extra money. I'm not joking. I'm really not joking. If you have a crazy obsession like this, you can actually turn it into economic research. So then what you do, you offer each subject the opportunity to trade their good for the other good. So it's exactly like the mugs and candy bars experiment. It's exactly the same, except he's doing it in the real world with real people who are actually, the thing you're trading them for is something they're there because they like it. That's why they're there. So we have some idea in this experimental setup that we're now catching people. This is not... Yeah, I mean, essentially, he's engaged in an actual market transaction in the context in which people came to engage in that kind of transaction, right? So this is, in many ways, natural. Okay, so good A for good B or vice versa. You compare the number of actual trades with the number predicted by the standard model, which, of course, is 50%, right? Very importantly, this is the point, List recruited dealers and non-dealers, okay? So there's a dealer right there, sitting behind his table. Here's a couple of non-dealers walking around with their hands held. She's probably holding his hand so he can't get it into his wallet. And then he also, among non-dealers, the customers, he recruited experienced and non-experienced traders, okay? On your own, and please don't turn the page, what do you expect the results to be? A, all subjects in those three subcategories will experience the endowment effect. Non-dealers will experience the endowment effect, but the dealers will not. Non-experienced non-dealers experience the endowment effect. Non-experienced non-dealers will experience the endowment effect and no one else will, and no one experiences the endowment effect. Okay, so maybe you'll need to take a minute to puzzle over what those statements actually mean. But based on what you think you know, certainly based on what Lawrence thinks he knows, you should be able to get a pretty good guesstimate of the right answer. Right? That wasn't hard for you, right, Lawrence? Okay, give it another 5, 4, 3,